Four-Way Review has partnered with writers to share a series of conversations on craft, exploring both the formation of specific scenes and the text as a whole. Metalwork, A Mining Daughter on Making Home by Jessica E. Johnson is a memoir of Johnson's unusual childhood during the 1970s and 80s, when she grew up in Mountain West mining camps and ghost towns, in places without running water or companions. These recollections are interwoven with the story of her transition to parenthood and post-recession Portland, Oregon. In Metalwork, Johnson digs through her mother's keepsakes, the histories of the places her family passed through, the language of geology, and a mothering manual from the early 20th century to uncover and examine the misogyny and disconnection that characterized her childhood world, a world linked to the present.
I think I started writing this based on my review of the files in about 2017. And the 2017 version looks incredibly different. It's very rough. I don't think, and the file that I found from 2017 that I kind of latched onto is about 80 pages long. And I finished, I know, the first like full draft that I considered done in 2018.
Okay.
And after that point, there were many, I had, I started sending it to agents around that time and actually did have interest from agents really early on. Not a yes, but a lot of like, I love this, let's try a revise and resubmit. And then I did have an agent for it for a while and we were working on revisions for it. So that sort of like early contact with that world, I think put me on a fairly disorganized revision process. And the agent I did have, I eventually parted ways with because I think we didn't have the same vision for the book. But I did a lot of drafting and redrafting. I think I have about 175. Well, I stopped counting at 175 files related to this project. Well, many of the revisions are very deeply structural. And one question I had quite often was, and this was in answer to one of the questions, I knew I wanted to write a book of prose, and I initially set out to write a continuous work. I think of this as like a book-length braided essay, essentially. And so I opted to do that rather than an essay collection. And I know that part of the reason I wanted to do that was because it would have been, I felt like to accomplish that for me based on where I was a poet and I'd written essays, but I was like, if I can do this, that would be something. So like I thought that it would bring me like sort of a sense of accomplishment. I knew that from the way from the poet I felt like I would have a lot of opportunities to sort of dodge the matter at hand and leave things on a resonant image kind of rather than interrogating them, which is not to say that that would be every poet, but it certainly was me as a poet. So I felt like I could reckon with things better in prose and also cope with just the sheer amount of context that there is around the mining industry. I feel like poems can really get weighed down by context easily. And I felt like I really needed space for that. I second guessed the decision a few times to make it a single continuous thing. I thought, I did, there are drafts toward the essay collection version of the book. And then I thought about like, what if it was autofiction? How would that be different? So there is an autofiction file. I worked so much on this, and when I go back and look at it, I'm like, whoa, I worked so much on this. And I would kind of give up is not quite the right word, but I'd sort of reached dead ends at certain times. Um, Particularly in, like, I wasn't sure how I wanted to publish it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep like really try to go for a big five, big four publisher, or if I wanted to try another route. Um, and so I kind of get get on pause in that question from time to time. And I can see when I look at the drafts, I did a lot of rewriting in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And 2020 was not a great time to be seeking an agent. And so then I was really on pause. And that is where I think I had kind of the breakthrough to the current version. I did a DIY writing retreat in the summer of 2021 with some writer friends. And I know, and I rewrote the first 50 pages there. I can also see when I look back at the process that when I got Scrivener, that was also a major breakthrough. If you don't know it, can I essentially in 2021 before the retreat, I think, pulled the manuscript apart. I pulled it apart into all its component pieces, and you can see in Scrivener what that looks like. And that allowed me to totally reconfigure it, recombine it, and then do a lot of the contextualizing work, I think, at the beginning and the end. And some of that was held over from the essay version, the essay collection version. I had a couple of standalone essays that well, one in particular, the end piece that I plopped back down in it. So that is sort of an overview of the entire process.
Oh, and so every time you revise, like, are all 175 odd drafts, are they drafts of the full finished manuscript, or are they just I'm revisiting a scene, or
Um, Many of the other thing that happened along the way is I started doing a lot of process notes.
okay.
So some of the 175 files are process notes and like annotated bibliographies and things like that. But I did redraft it wholly many times. And there's a lot of moving around. There's a lot of reorganizing. And when I look back at the drafts, I look back at them just this morning, I thought, you know, I made progress here. Like it started off in a worse place and ended up in a better place.
How did that transition from poetry into prose feel? You said you had written other essays, and I know I feel that that desire to dodge things in poetry. I do the same thing in my writing. Oh,
Mm,
I can obfuscate, and I'm being poetic. When
mhm.
you started to force yourself to dive into those scenes, what was that process like for you?
It was difficult. And I feel like I almost grew a different organ in the writing of this book. So I would write to a place where I felt like I just couldn't go any further. Like I had, and probably had made a hash of it and I didn't know what I was doing. And the next thing to do as a writer was just opaque to me. And sometimes the material is kind of emotional, or the stakes with the material are high for me. Um, and, you know, I would write 1,000 or 2,000 words or something and feel like I had just backed myself into a corner and I didn't have a way out. And then I would go for a walk. And on the walk, I would like the next thing to do would come to me. And that's kind of how I wrote it was just a, you know, it was heavy with fear. To be dramatic about it, but I felt my own inadequacy every day for the when I was drafting and redrafting. And again, I think around 2021 or so, um, I did somehow break through that and feel like I could hold the whole thing in my head a little better and feel like I could um, write with more intention around the themes I was trying to draw out.
You've spoken previously about climate grief in an interview with Full Stop, calling it a very direct connection to the notion of the future through one's children. As you wrote Metalwork, did you initially, I mean, even when it was Homemaker, have these thoughts about the climate or climate grief coming through? Or is that something that evolved over the course of the drafts? And then, if it had been something you had seen from the beginning, did you feel the way that you address climate change shifting as you work through this text over that portion of or that period of years?
I really appreciated this question. Um, Many things in the late revisions of Homemaker slash Metalwork, a lot of a lot of things came out that I think were good, but I was really striving for through line. And if they were veering the direction of reading off to a side stream, I removed a lot of things. So actually, earlier drafts had a lot more overt references to climate, both our immediate experience of climate chaos and also just as, yeah, the notion of futurity. Um, there's a lot in the book. There's a lot of stuff in the book as is, and there used to be more. So there was a lot of trimming, and climate was one of the things that did get trimmed. Um, I was thinking a lot about how the world has changed since the time I was growing up and all the things that would sort of foreshadow the future for my children. And, I grew up in a world whose workings were really material and really local. And um, I was thinking about what parts of my upbringing I want to keep and carry forward and which parts I would try to change for my own family and children and, the going forward. And I was also thinking about what I can offer my children, how their world will be different from mine. So when I think about their future, I do mostly think about climate and other areas of, I guess, what I consider to be like hypercapitalism and democratic decline. So yeah, those things were, I think, potentially more prominent in some of the earlier drafts. I also teach environmental literature, so I have a like this kind of ongoing window on a broad cross section of the way the population is processing climate change through my community college students and people's climate grief and people's climate anxiety. So it's something that I think about all the time.